It was quite clear this was going to cause high impacts across a broad area that would see transport infrastructure badly affected and deliveries, schools and workplaces closed.
We were seeing forecast probabilities of 30–40%, maybe 2 to 3 weeks in advance.
It was such a big relief just seeing, I'm not on my own, the baby's going to have help.
No one was going to get away with this extreme weather event.
I'd say it's probably the worst snow and ice event I've ever experienced.
During late February and early March 2018, the UK experienced its most severe spell of cold, snowy weather since December 2010. A bitter chill swept in from the east, and red warnings were issued as heavy snow blanketed many parts of the country. This event became known as the Beast from the East, but behind the headline name was a chain of atmospheric events and a coordinated response involving forecasters, emergency services and local authorities to both warn and protect the public. This is the story of how it unfolded, from the first signs of extreme weather weeks in advance to the impacts felt across the UK. Plus, could it ever happen again? Weeks before the first snowflake fell, forecasters began noticing an emerging signal in the weather prediction models, made increasingly clear by a tool developed by Rob Neal and his team at the Met Office.
So since 2012, scientists like myself have been working to produce a probabilistic weather pattern forecasting tool to help summarise information from hundreds of ensemble members into probabilistic look at what the most likely weather patterns are out to maybe several weeks in advance.
This probabilistic forecasting tool, known as Decider, takes output from over 250 computer forecasts and sorts it into 30 familiar weather patterns that the UK typically experiences. The result is a clear picture of which large-scale patterns, like an easterly flow, are most likely to dominate in the weeks ahead.
3 weeks before the Beast from the East, I first started seeing a clear signal from our post-processed output of an easterly flow occurring. At that lead time, we were quite confident there was going to be an easterly flow.
Seeing this level of confidence so far ahead was unusual. The signal pointed towards a weather pattern that doesn't often affect the UK, but when it does, the impacts can be severe.
This was particularly exceptional that we could see it forecast at such high probabilities so far in advance.
And there was a reason this signal was showing up so clearly.
As we entered 2018 and there were signals that the polar vortex may lose the strength of those core winds and reverse, causing something called a sudden stratospheric warming. We were getting very interested in that situation.
Each winter, strong winds circle high above the Arctic, trapping very cold air in the stratosphere. This circulation is known as the stratospheric polar vortex. Occasionally, it weakens or breaks down, causing a sudden rise in temperatures high in the atmosphere, known as a sudden stratospheric warming. When this happens, it can disrupt the jet stream lower down, increasing the chance of cold air outbreaks for the UK. And during the first half of February 2018, a sudden stratospheric warming occurred. Around 2 weeks later, its effects reached the surface. The jet stream shifted, and bitterly cold easterly winds were able to reach the UK.
So increasingly the confidence of the forecast got greater and greater. It was slowly getting colder, and we were actually warning people that, yes, there's snow on its way.
As February went on, the signal only became stronger.
The first half of February had been more unsettled in nature, more of a westerly flow, but it was really from the 18th of February we started to see these more sort of high pressure dominating types coming in, these more block types showing up with confidence in the forecast. And it initially started off with more of a direct easterly weather pattern showing up as the highest probability.
For Rob, this stood out as something he hadn't seen before.
I was quite surprised to see such high forecast confidence for these rare weather types, because typically the climatological occurrence of these easterly types may only be 2 or 3%, and we were seeing forecast probabilities of 30, 40%, maybe 2 to 3 weeks in advance. So this did take me by surprise.
For the UK, these patterns aren't just rare, they are among the coldest and snowiest we can experience at this time of year.
So we can rank these weather patterns according to their climatologies using data from a global reanalysis dataset. And what we find, if we rank them according to, say, their temperature or snow climatologies, that the weather patterns that were being forecast for the beasts from the east are the coldest and the snowiest weather patterns that we can experience over the UK during the February-March time of year.
The broad scale picture we had was very strongly blocked negative AO type pattern with high pressure across Scandinavia, northwestern parts of Russia, and a long fetch of increasingly very cold east-northeasterly winds emanating from way back into northeast Europe and northwest Russia, and that lasted for quite some days. We got cold air from much further away than we often do in similar equivalent kind of blocking patterns. So it was all set up for a very severe spell across the UK.
As the high-pressure system developed, it was given an official title by the Free University of Berlin, Anticyclone Hartmut.
Anticyclone Hartmut really didn't resonate with the public, and then this is when, you know, the tabloid media, the mass media come in and they do their job so well. The beast from the east, and that was it. People were interested.
As confidence grew, planning began, not just at the Met Office, but right across the country.
We're here in the Scottish borders. We cover a fairly big patch, all the way up to Edinburgh and including Edinburgh, down to the English border, across almost to kind of Northumberland. It was pretty clear that this was going to be big. It was pretty clear that it was well forecast. And it was pretty clear we would be needed. We weren't really sure at that time what the scale of our response would need to be. But the planning began on that Sunday evening. And that was working alongside the local authority. It was taking forecasts from the Met Office. It was liaising with our colleagues in the other emergency services and just starting to put those contingency plans in place so that we were going to be ready if we were needed.
Andy Cole is the Network Operations Control Centre Manager for Devon County Council Highways.
We started receiving some weather warnings from the Met Office probably 4 to 5 days before the main event. We take our time to analyse those warnings and start to see what resource we might be needing as we start to ramp up our response. We have a saying really, it's better to over-prepare than not. There were many meetings going on in preparation, working with our partners in the Blue Lights from the police and the fire and emergency planners to ensure that all the plans were in place as to how we were likely to deal with any issues that came our way, ensuring that our rest centres were available for stranded motorists. It's all about the planning.
We actually started to put together rotas. We had a new base. The base had just opened. We decided that the team would be based there on a continuous 24-hour basis, which we've never done before. We've never done since, actually. So that the base would always be staffed so that we were able to respond. So team members were all contacted. They were asked to sign up to rotas, clear the decks, and essentially be ready.
So I think from as early as the Monday of that week, we had streamers of convection forming over the relatively warm North Sea. Underneath those corridors of frequent snow showers, such as we had across parts of northeast England and central Scotland, you get many hours of very high snowfall accumulations, big flakes, big fluffy ones, and quite dry powdery snow, which you don't often see in this country. But in between, you can get gaps where hardly anything falls at all, and it's mainly sunny. And this regime persisted, by and large, for I think 2 or 3 days.
For Muriel Masson in the Scottish borders, it couldn't have come at a worse time.
And on the 28th of February, I remember walking around the house, we had loads of snow. I mean, it was quiet, it was very peaceful. but it was probably the worst condition to be going into childbirth at the same time.
We issued a red warning for snow across eastern Scotland, a threat to life. And this is really when the National Severe Weather Warning Service comes into its own, because I think the messaging was everywhere. It was on every radio station, it was on every network news station, it was across social media.
And everything was fine on the day before. I just walked around the house, took pictures, nice and peaceful. I think it was about 1:30 in the morning on the 1st of March, so bang on his due date, he said, no, I'm coming today.
Arrived here about 6:30, and I could already see on screen one of my colleagues had drafted a red warning for southwest England, and I knew straight away it was going to be one of those shifts.
From a sudden stratospheric warming to that blast of easterly winds at ground level to the snow which was drifting, causing metres of snow in places because of the strength of the wind and that cold, significant wind chill.
It was widely sub-zero by day and by night across almost all of the UK for quite some number of days, but it was -4, -5 in the middle of the day in many places. The dew points were very low. It was very, very dry air, apart from where you had the snow showers with the North Sea moisture, so it made it feel even colder. And of course, we had very strong northeasterly winds, so the wind chill was quite exceptional really for UK standards.
Feels like temperatures were widely below -10 Celsius, but as well as making it feel bitterly cold, the strong wind also caused disruption, particularly across northwest England and North Wales.
When you get winds coming in from the east and they pick up a lot of strength, they become turbulent over higher ground. They hit that higher ground, they sort of thrust up into the air, and you get all these eddies, these turbulence, which creates these really quite strong gusts, damaging winds, which can again have a destructive influence on all of the weather which is happening already.
It's towards the cold end of climatology, even going back by historical standards, just that we don't get these events very often now, and you could probably say it was a once in 20 to 30 year occurrence.
No one was going to get away with this extreme weather event. It was a multi-pronged event. It wasn't just the easterlies, it was coming from the south as well.
We had the very cold air well established across the country, and then we had Storm Emma, as named by the Portuguese Met Office. It was an area of low pressure at quite low latitudes, but with warm, moist air. That was going to shelve northwards across this very cold air and produce large-scale frontal snow across a large area, rather than the snow showers before, which had been a bit more hit and miss. This was covering a large area, and strong northeasterly winds with drifting, and the models were producing 15, 20, 25 centimetres of snow quite widely, with more than that with drifts on some of the high ground, and not just high ground as well, and over a prolonged period of time. So it was quite clear this was going to cause high impacts across a broad area that would see transport infrastructure badly affected and deliveries, schools and workplaces closed. So in all these occasions where a rare red warning where we have high confidence of the highest impacts was very much justified.
I was forecasting at the Met Office, but on the day that Storm Emma was going to hit that night, that's the 1st of March, it was a Thursday, I got into the Met Office studios, I think about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and broadcast as much as I could in terms of what I needed to for the day. By this point, we knew exactly what was going to happen. We were very concerned about the impacts.
It had been snowing gently through the morning, but it was always going to become steadier and heavier during the afternoon and evening. So we obviously were very busy communicating the warning, and we sent most non-operational staff home because we didn't want them getting stuck here in the building.
The main challenges really were due to abandoned cars. Because we were dealing with a county-wide problem, we obviously prioritised our A road to try to get through. Telegraph Hill, the A380, and Holden Hill, the A38, they're key arterial routes linking the West Country.
Most British snow is kind of temperatures sort of 0 to +1. It's very moist, high moisture content, it's sticky, it sticks to things. It has its own sorts of impacts. It causes accretion on power lines, whereas this sort of snow blows around. You get areas swept clear of snow by the winds, and you get drifts against hedges and walls which can be a couple of metres high. So it's completely different to the snow that we normally get in this country.
We'd have extremes where we'd have roads blocked and fields still green, where all the snow that had fallen has literally blown across the road. And the challenges that you're facing is that you start to clear these roads and make the way through for people to be able to use it. Then the wind picks up and the snow basically starts to fill in the gaps that you've just created.
Over those few days, we had 57 taskings. 670 hours of mountain rescue time was spent on those things. And they started to come in, and they started to come in thick and fast. And there were a variety of incidents that we were asked to help with. The usual stuff of cars getting stuck on, there's a notorious hill that crosses the English border, it's called the Carter Bar, and alongside our neighbouring team, Border Search and Rescue, we were helping to drag cars up and down. It was bad. I mean, the Borders does get snow every year, but typically we're talking about fairly small quantities. This was different. This was significant drifts. I mean, there was a huge volume of snow, and then the wind moved it around. In some places, I recall them being as high as the Land Rover Defender vehicles that we use. So we're talking, 6-7 feet high.
By the Thursday, there was just snow everywhere. Because it was my first child, I didn't think, it was not that urgent, because usually it takes quite a long time. But it didn't.
We also got heavily involved in moving kind of mission critical people around, health visitors, specialist nurses, those kinds of things. I got involved in a number of these, and I do recall quite clearly having to battle our way out to a remote farmhouse to pick up a specialist nurse who worked in the midwifery department. I think the neonatal at the local hospital here, who needed to be in there because there were mothers-to-be that needed her to be there.
They had to send an ambulance, but they couldn't send a normal ambulance, a regular ambulance. They had to send one from further away, which was a 4-wheel drive ambulance, because that's the only one that could get to me in the condition at the time.
When we put salt down to deal with ice and snow, the effectiveness of salt as a de-icer starts to diminish from about -7. During this period, we were seeing double-figure minus temperatures.
And there was another hazard, one that's rarely seen in the UK.
The way this formed was because I mentioned this warmer air from the south was shelving across the dense cold air, so that the warmer air is forced to rise. Initially, although the air is warmer aloft, it's still below zero, so you still get the whole column of atmosphere below zero, so it all fell as snow. Eventually, as the warm advection aloft continues, you start to get a melting layer, not at the ground, but maybe a few thousand feet in the air. And so when the snowflakes fall through this above zero layer, they melt, but then fall back into the cold wedge underneath it. So we had, later on that evening, when the snow had started to ease off, a spell of probably a couple of hours of moderate freezing rain, which is pretty unusual in the UK, anywhere in the country, let alone down here in the temperate southwest. That formed a layer of, it must have been 2 or 3 centimetres of ice on top of relatively deep snow. The next morning, coming for my second day shift on the Friday the 2nd, stepped out of the hotel, and it's like standing in creme brulee. It's like a crunchy layer, then fluffy underneath it. I've never seen anything like it in this country, and may never do again.
Meanwhile, in parts of the southwest, communities were completely cut off, including the coastal towns of Linton and Lynmouth in North Devon.
I believe that they were cut off for around 24 to 48 hours. We deployed our snow blowers and a lot of resource up into the A39, working with Somerset to try to get that clear, because this was probably one of the key areas that was impacted the most.
Further north, helicopters were deployed to deliver supplies to isolated communities, but in some places, help still had to arrive in the most basic way possible.
This was a remote residence out in the hills towards the Pentlands. The occupants were kind of stuck there. There was not really any way of getting them in or out, but they were running. I mean, it was cold, obviously it was cold, and they needed fuel for staying warm, basically. And so there was an unusual tasking for the team to procure and sledge in coal to keep that house warm enough that the folks could stay there.
And then there was this moment.
Finally, I saw the ambulance coming. I had the light out in a courtyard in the garden, and seeing that ambulance arrive was one of the I don't know how to describe it, most wonderful thing. It was such a big relief just seeing, I'm not on my own, the baby's going to have help to come into the world.
A breakthrough also for Andy and his team, as the connecting roads to Linton and Lynmouth were finally cleared.
It was great to get through to them. The euphoria, it was almost like let's have a street party to celebrate getting through and being able to sort of move on from it and make sure that people got the necessary support and help that they needed.
Whilst Andy's team were getting through to Linton in Devon, another Linton further north was also facing isolation.
Snowed in, essentially. The occupants could not get out of the house. So we helped to dig them out of their house.
We did made it to the ambulance, which in itself was quite difficult because there was a lot of snow. I've got mobility difficulties. I'm finding it difficult to walk. And of course, there's a baby on this way down. But somehow we made it to the ambulance. And I remember the one driving at the time thinking, right, now how are we going to turn around? Because, of course, they've managed to come all the way in the dark, in the snow. And then it's another much more difficult thing as well to be able to turn around and not come off the road. But they did make it. And Aidan was born 5 miles away. He didn't want to wait. So he was born in the ambulance. We had to stop the ambulance. And while he was born, totally fine. He just fell asleep and slept the rest of the way to the hospital.
Muriel chose the name Aidan, forever linking her son to the storm he was born into. You called your baby Aidan.
Yes, fiery and red.
I was going to ask if you know what Aidan means, but you do. You know, it means little fire or fiery one.
He's got beautiful red hair, and that I could see in the ambulance already. At the same time, fiery and strong, because he was absolutely unperturbed by what was happening. It was just, here I am, that's it, I'm going back to sleep. So that was quite a steady strength in him, I have to say. Here comes the snow cub next to me.
How do you feel being called a snow cub? Does your mum talk about the story about your birth all the time?
Not really. Not all the time.
What's your favourite bit of the story? What do you like hearing about?
I just like all the snow.
As well as a name, it turns out we share a love of the snow. But could the beast from the east happen again?
In statistics, we have average return periods, so something may happen on average once every 10, 20, 30 years, but that doesn't mean they'll occur at that kind of spacing, and you can get clusters of events. And this was a case in point, because although we had the deep snow at the beginning of March, about 2.5 weeks later in this part of the country, we had a very similar amount of snow again. Not with the freezing rain this time, but nonetheless similarly deep snow, but haven't had anything like that since then in 8 years. So you can often get clustering of events with long gaps in between. So when we hear if this is a once in X or Y number of year event, just be careful about how to apply those statistical return periods.
I think the messaging went incredibly well because most people did stay at home.
It's been really great to see the product be useful and get the warnings and communication out nice and early so that people could be prepared.
Yes, 2010 was a big snow event, but the Beast from the East in 2018 supersedes that. This was snow with rocket fuel.
An old colleague of mine said, my old manager, prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And sometimes the weather will just win.
Extreme cold events don't often occur in the UK, but when they do, the impacts can be severe. The Beast from the East showed that our response is what matters. From forecasters and emergency services to local authorities and volunteers on the ground. When people work together, guided by early warnings and clear communication, lives really can be protected. If you enjoyed this video and you're interested in learning more about sudden stratospheric warming, why not watch this video by Alex Burkill.